There's a 10-second delay, so I can never quite tell when I'm starting to start, but I think I'm going to do that now. Okay, let's go.
Let's
All
do
right.
this.
Okay, I have pressed the go live button. Let's see how it goes. So this is Yay Emacs 33 with Prot, Sacha and Prot Talk Emacs. And today we're going to be talking about underappreciated Emacs built-ins, which is the theme for this month's Emacs Carnival, kind of like this, shared, lots of people writing or talking about a specific topic. This one is hosted by Ross A. Baker, so thanks for hosting that. Anyway, so I'm here with Prot, and I was very tempted to just dive into this brain dump like last time about interesting Emacs built-ins that people should know about. But I thought, let's start with the kinds of problems that newcomers and intermediate users might run into, especially the problems they don't even know about, because Emacs would allow them to do things that other editors might not offer. But they gotta think about it first, right? They gotta discover that this is a need of theirs and that Emacs can help them with it. So maybe this conversation can be a high-level discussion of these concepts to help people develop this intuition for what's out there, particularly for the things that Emacs does differently compared to other editors. And if we start with a problem, and I have several that I often run into in my own life, you might suggest others as well, then we can talk about how the things that are built into Emacs can support that and how they fit together at a high level. So we don't have to go into okay, this is precisely how to start a keyboard macro and how to stop it. People can look that up in the manual. But the idea of a keyboard macro and how it's useful, that would probably be a good thing for a conversation. And then for the advanced users who are listening to this, we can sprinkle in some things we've seen about some really advanced uses of these built-ins, because there's a lot of high-level use that I haven't even got into yet. So Prot is here, which means that because we've got two people, you can see how these same tools can be used in different ways to support different workflows. Sounds good?
Yes, sounds
All
great.
Right. So I'm going to suggest some problems that I have, and of course, Prot, you can share some from your experience and from the times that you've coached other people. My main problem with life in general is focus and distraction. Because I have a kid, so my focus time is very unpredictable. It can be interrupted any moment by somebody needing help. And my life over the last 10 years has mostly been about, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, maybe 15, 1 hour of focus time if I'm lucky. And so this is a universal challenge. Well, some people actually get the focus, but my brain is not one of those focusable things. It has to work in stops and starts. So any chance this is a problem that you also run into?
Not to that extent, but I have the propensity to go down rabbit holes. I will go really deep. You give me something which I know nothing about, I will become an expert in it. But of course, this is a problem when you combine it with curiosity, because now you want to learn everything. Thankfully, I have learned to control myself. And if you give me something I don't know about, I will say, okay, sounds very tempting, but I will not even try.
And so
I won't even go down the rabbit hole.
And so these are actually probably both two sides of the same problem, and something that a lot of people will resonate with when you're working on something and you realize, okay, I gotta go do this other thing first, or I'm curious about this question that has come up in my brain. I want to go down that rabbit hole. So how do we manage this? Emacs is here to help. My first recommendation for this problem is okay, take advantage of org mode or other built-in note-taking task management support systems, because it sometimes people think, okay, an IDE is just the IDE, right? Or if they're programmers, it's just for code. Or sometimes people are writing and they're using a text editor just for writing their novel. But because Emacs has these built-in ways to support managing your to-dos and all that stuff, it's very easy just to stuff that task in there, have a quick shortcut to go to your to-do list and put something in, and then it gets out of your brain so that you can try to focus on the thing that you're trying to get done. So that's my quick, underappreciated, maybe actually a lot of people really appreciate this, but, it's one of those things people coming to Emacs from other editors might not immediately catch on to. Do you have
and you might not understand the extent of how valuable it is. It's the gift that keeps giving, basically.
Yeah. When your to-dos and your notes are just a couple of keystrokes away, and they can say the context of whatever you were looking at. But there are all sorts of other small conveniences that Emacs has that also help with this kind of distraction and focus thing. Like, for example, the kill ring. It's such a simple thing, right?
It's
Okay.
super simple, but super useful. And just to say on the kill ring, it has been part of Emacs for several versions now, but it's not obvious. If you type meta y without control y beforehand, you get completion. So you can select something that you had in your kill ring like a few kills ago, like a clipboard, basically navigation, which is something that you don't see right away. So just a thing.
All right. So if people are coming from outside Emacs and like, what is this thing that you're talking about? So people are used to having a clipboard, right? And as soon as you copy something, your program forgets the thing that you previously copied. Or on mobile phones now, if you press paste, you can sort of see a selection of the previous things you've copied before. So it's kind of like that, but larger. And as Prot points out, you can use completion with it. So meta y is yank, but looking at the history.
Yank pop, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And
whatever.
What I find useful about this is sometimes I'll copy something because I want to go paste it somewhere else, and then on the way to that somewhere else, I get distracted by something, and I need to copy that, but I know that the kill ring will have the other copies that I meant to put somewhere else.
And by completion here, we mean you can type and match that thing, narrow down to it. So you don't have to go searching for it and, okay, which one exactly is it, right? So you can find it more easily.
Registers is the other thing that I like to use when I know that I'm copying several things and I need to paste them, possibly in different order. And again, that's another thing that people are like, what is this thing even? Do you have do you find yourself explaining registers to people who are new to Emacs?
Yes. So registers, I think, is something that is underutilized because, of course, why would you need them when you can have a kill ring with a history, right? So why do I need to store things in a register when I can just have them one after the other in the kill ring? And the answer is because if you do something more advanced, such as with a keyboard macro, it will always be correct. It's precise. It's not give me the last thing on the kill ring or last thing -2 or whatever. Give me that, right? And you specify what that is. So it's an expression of intent.
Yeah, so if you imagine...
Plus more advanced things like incrementing a number or whatever, but I think that's super specialized.
I don't even use that very much, but I know some people who use that to great effect, and so that's one of like those little Easter eggs for advanced users. If you're watching this and you're like, okay, I know about these built-ins, but there's more. Emacs is like this fractal complexity. It just keeps getting more interesting the more you dig into it. Okay, so registers. Registers can store text that you're copying, but they can also store other things. I think, do you use them for window configurations, Prot?
I have used them for frame sets.
Oh, yeah?
So it's windows and their frames and their window configuration. So if you have like 3 frames and they are split in different ways, you restore that.
And you can do all of that with just one register.
With the register, yeah. And I have created another register of mine just to see how it works, basically, where it saves a file with a specific location, but it's supposed to be in memory, not like a bookmark. I did it just for testing.
Oh, I have that too. I use registers to files so that I can jump to things like my Emacs configuration or my notes or something like that. And I use that instead of bookmarks so that I can just have a keyboard shortcut go straight to that register. I mean, I can do the bookmark, I can do the register jump, and then I can just easily press one more key to get to the file that I want. So registers, again, so if you're not used to Emacs, this is a built-in that's got a lot of features for helping you save text to things, especially if you're going to use them in keyboard macros, because you can say, okay, insert text A, and then insert text C, and then insert text B. But you can also use them for other things like frame set, like the way that your windows and your buffers are arranged, or files that you want to go back to.
Yeah, very useful.
Yeah. Another built-in that I find really helpful for managing my focus and distraction is narrowing. Because you're like, I get distracted by all the other stuff, or I worry about accidentally revealing private information when I am streaming or something else. So instead, I narrow it to just the task that I'm working on or just the function that I'm editing. And that's super useful not only for keeping me focused, but also for making sure that my changes don't affect more text than I mean to. Like if I'm using a
Yes.
substitute, you can select a region, and a lot of the functions in Emacs will operate only within that region. But reselecting the region like several times, if you end up needing to do multiple operations, it's a bit annoying. So instead, I'll just narrow, and then it can work on the whole thing.
Yes, yes. And when you narrow, you can also be less careful in a sense. Like you do a query replace, when you do exclamation mark, it means yes to all. But if you are in a narrowed region, yes to all means only within that portion of the buffer. So if you take care to narrow to where you want to be, then okay, yes to all. Yeah, you don't even have to check.
And I think this is underappreciated enough that, in fact, if you try to use, well, is it Control XN? If you
That's
try
the
to use
prefix key.
yeah, yeah.
Control XN for narrowing. Yeah.
Yeah, the first time Emacs will say, "Are you really, really sure?" Because it's one of those disabled commands, right? It's like you gotta enable it for yourself. You gotta say, "Okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to panic if the rest of my file disappears. I know it's there. I'm just choosing to focus on it." I think it's actually available off the menu as well, but I haven't actually used it off the menu bar. Have I?
Yeah, I don't use the menu, so I cannot tell. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I
if it's-
remember that prompt where, are you really sure? It's disabled
yeah.
by default.
Yeah,
Please make sure you know what you want.
yeah. Keyword shortcut. That's the way to do it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I do use it, extensively. Narrowing, of course, is generic, but org, since you mentioned org, also has its own narrowing. The most common one is narrow-to-subtree, where you narrow to a heading and its subheadings.
Yeah, and Charlie in the chat says narrowing to defun feels easier than trying to mark the function before search and replace. I love narrowing. In fact, I narrow to functions or sets of functions a lot because, I do a lot of work with JavaScript in HTML files. So it's a single file HTML that I can upload, and it's got CSS and regular HTML in it as well. But I often just need to copy the particular snippet of JavaScript so I can paste it into the console as I'm making changes. So I have a function that looks for certain text, start of focus, end of focus, and then it narrows to that section, which might include several functions. And then I have another keyboard shortcut that just copies the entire buffer and adds a little text at the end so I can run whatever function I need to test. So I can paste that into the browser. So narrowing either to one function or to a predefined region or whatever else, it's very useful.
Yes, very nice.
And then people are like, yeah, but what if I want to narrow to two parts of the same file?
Nice. And that's why you have indirect buffers there.
It's Emacs, of course there's a way to do it. And indirect buffers is another one of those built-ins that's a little hard to wrap your head around, because you're like, okay, you're opening a file twice, but you can have it narrow to a different part of it, or you can be looking at a different part of it, or you can even have it in a different major mode.
Yeah. And the point, like the practical one, is the different levels of narrow, really. The most common one, I mean, where it's like, okay, yeah, you focus on this heading, and now you focus on this other heading.
Like I'll often split my buffer if I know that I'm not going to narrow. So that way, if I need to refer to two parts of the file at the same time, I can have one window focusing on one part of it and the other window focusing on the other part of it. Might even be a different frame. And that way, it's just like I don't have to keep switching back and forth. I don't have to scroll up and down all the time. I can just look at one and then look at the other and arrange my windows on my desktop as I see fit. But if you want to do something more complicated, like more narrowing or different modes or whatever, then cloning an indirect buffer is the way to do it.
Yes, very good. I don't know if you have this, but because you mentioned the region earlier, I will say it. maybe you have it somewhere. I don't see it there.
Go say.
When you know regular undo in Emacs and how it works, but when you have a region selected, undo works in the region. So you make a change here, you go make some changes up there, you come back here, you mark this region, undo only works here. It doesn't work up there anymore.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a built-in that people will benefit if they develop an intuition for it. You know, like if you've made a bunch of changes to your file and you want to, you notice that something's wrong in just this section, you can do that, select a region and then undo within it to just fix those things. Yeah. So that's my, those are some of the things that I've thought about for focus or distraction or getting tempted to go down rabbit holes. Do you use any of the other Emacs built-ins to help you with your tendency to dive really deep into something?
So the other one would be bookmarks. You mentioned it already, but it really is worth having it there. Because the nice thing with bookmarks is that not only it's a way to go to a place, but you also give it a name. So the counterpart, like you said, okay, I have a key to quickly go to my init file, for example, my configuration file. But what if I want to have something by name that I don't, it doesn't quite fit nicely in all the keys, right? So then I can have a descriptive name. Maybe it's long. For example, my notes for my meeting with Sacha, which is in mid-June, blah, 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 right? I can have a big name, long name like that, which is descriptive and gives me context. So then I use a bookmark for that.
And that's a great built-in solution for the general problem of finding your way around. So like if in case you're trying to find your way around different files or different projects or different places in various files, bookmarks are great for that because you can give it a name, and that means you can file more things than will fit on your keyboard, and kind of an advanced use of it. I was talking to Ben about in the previous Emacs chat about so he bookmarks lfeed searches, and based on his naming convention, if he names his bookmark a certain way, then it becomes available for these other things, these other functions that he has. So if you have a naming convention for your bookmarks, you can do other things with it from Emacs Lisp.
Yeah, exactly. That's the more advanced power user thing. Like it's just data and you have access to it.
And going back to something a little more basic for the problem of finding your way around, I think that isearch is one of those built-ins that, again, people coming from a different editor might not think of using, because find page is an annoying experience in a browser or in other editors. You have to go to the menu, you do it, and then there's things you have to click on in order to go to the next one or the previous one and so forth. But isearch lets you just keep typing, and then you can just press the isearch shortcut again, Control S, to search for the next one, or you can go to the previous one very easily. So isearch is great.
Yeah, it is. I think one nice quality of life improvement to it, which again is several Emacs versions old, is a counter. It shows you are on number 3 out of 10, for example. So you have a sense of where you are going.
Yeah, otherwise I find I just wrap around to the beginning and I'm like, okay, I take a moment to reorient myself because it has wrapped around. And the other thing that I want to point out, related to isearch as well, is using it to help you mark a region. And this is something, again, that people aren't used to because you're in other editors, you highlight things with your mouse, right? And here in Emacs, we say, okay, press Control Space to say you're going to start a region, and then just search for the end of the region, navigate to it somewhere, and the space between, the text between when you press Control Space and where your cursor is now, that's the region.
Yes, exactly. And on this node, Control X, so which has by default, it's exchange point and mark, which if your cursor is here and where you started is up there, it moves the cursor up there, and now where you started is down at that point. So you can expand the region both ways. You can keep switching and expanding.
I have never thought about using it for expanding the region. I usually just use it to confirm that yes, I am actually selecting the parts that I meant to select. Because by the time, of course, I've found the thing that I wanted to end the region with, I've forgotten, or I'm not entirely sure I have the right start. So I was using Control X to just very quickly verify and have everything nicely highlighted. But expanding the region, yeah, that's a thing you can do with it.
Yeah, of course. Like now it's obvious, right? But it's something that you may notice by mistake, by accident.
Hang on a second. Can
Yeah,
you
yeah,
call
of
you
course.
back in a? I'm just. Can you call me back in a sec? I'm on stream. Okay. Okay. And I will just tell my sister. She said, "I will call you later."
Yeah. Tell her now we have to work with point and mark. Like this is important stuff.
In my life with distractions, right? Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah. Charlie says, "I love that you can make those marking tricks part of a keyboard macro." The other thing I want to say with marks is you can also navigate by mark, and it's like control X space, something.
Control U, control space.
Oh yeah, control U. Okay, control U, control space.
It's I think it's pop to mark is the concept. Yeah.
Okay, whatever that. Yeah. So popping to mark. Let's just go with the concept because people can search for the key binding, which basically means for all the places where you were before you went off searching for something else or doing some other command, you can go back to those places in sequence. And I think there are even some commands to let you just easily navigate through all the places you've been previously. But that is a thing that you can do with Emacs built-ins. It's called popping the mark. It lets you revisit places.
Yeah. Another point related to this and also related to yank that we said earlier. So imagine you have copied something and you are pasting it now in your Emacs. And then what you want to do is select it, maybe to do something with it, such as to make it all uppercase or whatever, right? So instead of selecting it manually, you can just do Control X. Because when you paste something or when you do isearch or whatever, it has the effect of updating the mark. So then you can work with that.
Yeah, that one I use fairly often because that way, and also that way you can easily see what it highlights the part that you've just pasted, and then you can do your other replacements or uppercasing or whatever else to it. Okay.
And the nice part for this is the indent-rigidly. Control X, Control Y by default, where you can now have a region of text, including an implicit region between mark and point, and you just shift it around, like literally left or right. Try it, it's very nice. Control X, Control I.
Control X, I. Yeah, not Control I. Control X, Control I. Yes. Yeah. And I think you can even use the arrow keys to move things, so you can just nudge it until it looks right, which is great because sometimes when you paste things, of course the indentation isn't the same as all of the rest of your stuff, so you might want to put it all the way into an org list or whatever else, code block, whatever. Okay, so Control X, Control X. Very handy even after you paste. H. Melman also points out the fact that things like xref or Imenu push the last location before jumping means popping the mark is an easy way to go back from various navigation mechanisms. So, in general, if you have navigated away from something using some magical Emacs command that has taken you far from where you are, you can always find your way back home or back to where you were by popping the mark. And I think there's even a distinction between popping the mark like in your local, your buffer or whatever, versus popping your global mark. So you can go to a different buffer that you were just in if you wanted to.
Yes, very nice. And just to say, of course, many of these are also augmented by packages. So when you install a package, it doesn't introduce completely new functionality. It adds to existing one. For example, the consult package, which is very useful, very nice, has something to do with what you just mentioned, like with the mark, navigating the mark in a visual way, so you get to see it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. H. Melman actually points out that local and global marks are useful to navigate through. Yes, and check out all these other packages for adding extra functionality around that. Matthew says, thinking about iSearch wrapping around search. So when you get to the bottom of your file, when you're iSearching and there's no other matches to be found, it will by default wrap you around to the beginning of the file so you can keep searching from there. Matthew says you can either have scroll to position to know the direction. It also indicates the position in your mode line, or you can have your mode line flash to say it moved from last to first. I don't have that configured. I should look into how to get that configured, because so it's like all these little secrets, right?
Why not? Why not?
Why not? Okay. But sometimes you don't need to make a big navigational jump. You just need to move forward by a little bit. And Emacs has built-in shortcuts for navigating by expression, maybe the things inside the parentheses or the things inside the quotes, as well as natural language shortcuts like navigating by word or by sentence. And those are some very useful built-ins that are well worth learning the keyboard shortcuts for.
Yes, indeed. And actually, of course, we call them S expressions, and the terminology of the commands alludes to Lisp, but they work in other programming languages as well. So, for example, there is the forward S expression, but it works in other languages which don't have this Lispy syntax.
So, if you skipped over that part of the tutorial or the manual, go back and read it, because it can save you some time. And it also, in a pinch, it will also help you make sure that your parentheses are matched up correctly and you go to where you expect them to go. There are other ways to make it easier to match up parentheses or braces or brackets or quotes, like show parent or whatever. But sometimes I just go forward and back to see whether I end up in the right place.
Just to say something, a small trick here, like if you are writing specifically Emacs Lisp, and there is a very common mistake of adding an extra parenthesis, right? And it says end of file during parsing, or one less parenthesis. What you can do with a combination of keyboard macros, you can do, you go to the beginning and you do Control Meta E to go to the end of the defun. And then in a keyboard macro, you keep doing that, next, end, right? Until it stops. And you know where your error is.
Oh, and I should tell people, if you give the execute keyboard macro a negative argument, it'll run until error. So you just do that and it'll drop you where it ends. You don't have to manually press E like 500 times.
Exactly. And the run until error happens when you are in a narrowed region as well. Error here means end of region, end of buffer.
Yes. I should point out, in the specific case where you're trying to hunt down a stray parenthesis, you should also just use check parents, which will tell you.
Yeah, of course.
And for non-syntax related, other errors that are not just limited to missing quotation marks or parentheses, it's well worth taking the time to set up fly check or fly make or whatever error checking thing you want to use, because then you can navigate to the previous and next errors as easily as you would with other, with keyboard shortcuts. And if you get the hang of doing that, you can also use the same mental model to navigate through like matches for, like, if you're doing a keyword search with grep, then you can use the next error, previous error to also go to just the next match or the previous match.
Very good. Yes, that's very useful.
I am not using tags nearly as much as I probably should for navigating symbols.
Tags, in the context of programming. Me, I haven't used that, no.
Oh, yeah? I guess because you primarily work with Emacs Lisp, so it's, it's easy enough to find the definition from there.
Yeah. But iMenu is the other one along those lines.
So that's interesting. You don't use the menu bar, but you use iMenu.
Yes, iMenu is useful because, of course, it's with completion. Now, I should say here, of course, that the default iMenu has this concept of going in steps, but you can flatten the list, which is more interesting for the purpose of completion. I believe what I'm saying is the case, but I don't remember anymore. But you can have a flattened list at which point you navigate the file with completion.
I should try that, because I really like the way that org, when you're navigating by the outline, you can also configure it to flatten the list so you don't have to complete the heading and the next heading and all that stuff. H Moment says you don't actually need FlyMake for the error navigation thing, you can just use like next
Mm-hmm.
error and previous error, which works with compile and grep and occur and a bunch of other things that kind of have the same convention. So yes, if you use the meta-x compile command to run your whatever your compilation step is, it will parse the output of many compilation systems, programs, and it will let you jump to the next error. It will also even show you the errors, I think. Anyway, so you don't need FlyMake. FlyMake just gives you the squiggly underlines, but you can
Mm-hmm.
use next error right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
FlyMake is more narrow. Yeah, correct.
I think projects and project-based navigation is another big chunk of Emacs built-in functionality that is useful for people who have a hard time finding their way around. You don't have to like manually find each file. You can set up shortcuts so you can say, I want to go to this project, and then from within this project I can find a file very easily.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This is indeed very powerful. And the thing is, you don't have to also think in terms of the structure of the project, like the tree structure of the project. Because if you do find the file in the project, it will flatten the structure for you. So then you use completion to find it, or find the directory where something is. And of course, you can still use the tree view as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great because then, especially for example, in Java projects, the directory structure gets very deep because they have to be like, the domain name and package names and all that stuff. Just have either project or projectile index all of your files for you, and then you can jump to a file by name anywhere in your structure. And you can tell it also to ignore certain files, which is handy, so that you don't have to go into, say, your node modules. That would be silly.
No, yeah, that would be a nightmare.
All right. Do we have do we have basically the Emacs built-ins for finding your way around well covered here, or other recommendations that people should go check out?
Yeah, these are already very useful. Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing is that, again, most of these, if not all, are augmented by packages. So the core functionality is there, and then you can do more stuff with them. For example, with projects, you may want to have an arrangement where you put them in separate tabs, and then you use a package like tab spaces so that each tab has its own buffer list, or my package like bframe, so that you put them in separate frames, and each frame has its own buffer list. So that basically, when you search for buffers, you only see those related to the project.
I am not using tabs nearly as much as I probably could. So that is one of my underappreciated Emacs built-ins here. And I'm getting the sense that people use tabs to say, okay, this is the set of windows related to managing my mail, or this is a set of tabs related to this project. This is a set of windows related to this project, or this is a set of windows related to managing my notes about something. Is that what you use tabs for?
I seldom use them. I use them specifically only within the context of popping into a Magit, whatever, interface. So I have my project that I'm working on. Let's say it's split in 3 windows. And then I want to leave everything intact and just go into Magit to do some Git operation. So I configure display buffer list. So when I do mx Magit status, whatever, it goes in a new tab. So then I leave my work where it is, I do the Git things, then I quit those, I'm back to my layout.
I know you're a good advocate of checking out display buffer alias and all the wonderful things it can do. I should definitely look into having it set up a tab, because that sounds a lot nicer than trying to remember, okay, I need to save my window configuration to register and then do this thing. I have it set up actually so that I can winner undo in order to get back to my previous configuration. But of course, if I need to flip back and forth between 2 different views, like the Magit and my project code, then a tab would work much better for this purpose, I think.
Yes, and it scales better as well. Like if you need to have 3 tabs or whatever.
Or a window, or a new frame. But sometimes managing frames gets a little annoying too.
Of course, there are pros and cons. Speaking of frames, one nice thing is that there is completion again to select frames. So I forget how it's called. Switch to frame, I think, is the command. So if you have lots of frames and you don't know where they are, you can use completion for that. And if you want, you can also name frames. I believe it's a rename frame. I forget now the command. But basically, you can give it a specific name rather than it changing the name all the time. And so you can say, okay, this is my super important note for our live stream, right? That's the frame for you. Now you can find it.
I I should look into that. I also underutilize frames because for the most part I have a keyboard shortcut like super one which jumps back to Emacs, you know, raises my Emacs window. But it doesn't work so well if I have multiple Emacs window, like multiple Emacs frames. But if I can figure out how to get mentally through that, or if I switch to EXWM as my window manager, then I'm sure that will, you know, managing multiple Emacs frames will be a lot easier. But at least tabs
Yeah.
I can probably use within that one frame in order to manage
Yeah,
different windows.
I would say tabs is the first thing you want to check. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
frames is a little bit more, like you have to change your mental model a little bit.
Yeah. HMelman has one more tip to include in this section on finding your way around. You can use these S expression commands in prose too. Like for example, control meta U or backwards up list moves you out of a quote or a parenthesis, and then you can control meta E to go to the end of it. So even if you're writing, for example, a novel and you're saying, okay, I want to get out of this quote and go to the next sentence, you can either isearch to the start of it, or you can go up out of the quote and then go to the end of the quote. Also very handy to learn the commands for killing an S expression, which again also works with other stuff like quotes or parentheses, because then you can copy and paste things, or you can kill it. You don't have to paste it back. It's just you delete it and then you type something else in. It's fine.
Exactly. And one of those is the mark S expression, which is very useful.
Oh yeah. And Matthew also shares follow mode allows the same file with multiple frames like a book. So follow mode can work with 2, 3, or more windows. And this is, you have an ultra wide, right, Prot? So like, okay,
Yeah.
you can have several columns following the same file, and you can scroll, and all of them will scroll in sync.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
I forget, does follow mode work with different files?
I with different files, I don't think so. No, like kind of a scroll log for all windows, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so. I haven't tried it. Yeah.
Worth looking into. If you do find yourself needing to compare one file with another, like manually, then maybe like emerge, Ediff, what would it? Ediff merge.
Ediff would do that. Like you would have them side by side. But the thing with Ediff is that you don't get like a scroll log for both. Like
No.
it's only navigation through the differences. So that wouldn't be exactly that.
Yeah. Anyway, but for the purposes of comparing, Ediff will let you compare, you know, two files, but you can even use it to compare two buffers. However, Prot does have some recommendations in this the one on the defaults that you shared before on how to make Ediff more manageable.
Yeah, I think by default it's not intuitive, because by default when you do Ediff without any configuration, it will display its panel in a separate frame. So if you have never used many frames, that's already your first problem. Like you don't even know what happened. The second problem is that the layout will be one above the other, which depending on your screen, you have like a wide screen, so it's not as easy of a layout. And then you have to figure out where the other frame with the panel is. So basically two variables where you change them, and you have the panel at the bottom, the control panel, and then file A here, file B there. And of course, you can do it with 3 files as well.
I will find it and put it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Matthew also points out that the following also works with centered cursor mode, which will keep the cursor position in the middle of the frame. So I can't remember whether there's also like a scroll lock or whatever.
Scroll lock mode,
Yeah, okay.
There is scroll lock mode as well.
Or there was another built-in that someone mentioned about that scrolls it one line at a time, keeping it centered, I guess, which the person found very useful because their cat was sitting on their laptop. And so does see without skipping over things. So moral lesson is learn about the Emacs built-in because you never know when a small mammal will be obscuring half of your screen. You can still use Emacs.
Nice.
Which actually is an interesting segue into this thing about discoverability. Because Emacs is quite unlike many other editors. It is very well documented, and if you can figure out how to navigate and find that documentation and even how to make this fun for you, then you can do all sorts of interesting things with it. Okay, so built-in stuff. Self-documentation. I love telling people, okay, you can just press Control-HK or describe key to describe anything. You can Control-HF, any function. You can, Control-HV, any variable. So describe whatever is great. And of course, adding Control-H to the end of the keyboard shortcut that you've started but you've forgotten how to finish, especially if you've turned on which key mode, is great for listing the actual shortcuts that start with that sequence.
And even without which key, it will put all those shortcuts in a help buffer, and it will show the key and the name of the command. Of course, you can click on the command to read about.
Someday, I think it would be amazing if Emacs comes with like an easy for like a completion interface that's easy for people to understand and get started with. But in the meantime, if you don't already have completion set up, that is well worth taking the time to figure out.
Yeah. The built-in one has improved tremendously.
Yes.
And I mean minibuffer.dl here, right? Has improved tremendously over the various recent versions, but you still need to be aware of all the user options to configure it. So to get, for example, a single column view instead of a grid with 100 options. And that requires some effort. So out of the box, if you really want something that is built into Emacs and does completion in a way that is fairly easy to understand, it would be iComplete vertical mode or FIDO or FIDO, whatever, vertical mode.
And another thing that Emacs does differently that might be good for people to learn about is that in Emacs it is totally okay to not remember the keyboard shortcuts for everything, or not use the menus for everything, because not everything will fit in the menus either. If you kind of remember the name of the function, you can use meta-x and possibly completion to go run that function, which is helpful because sometimes knowing the words to call a function is a lot easier to remember than remembering the shortcut for it.
Exactly. And I would say completion, like if you have to configure one part of Emacs, it's completion. Like if you improve that part of it, it will help you everywhere. Like we were saying earlier about bookmarks, it helps you there. The kill ring, it helps you there. Finding files, it helps you there. Switching to buffers, and so on, like what we are now talking about. It's always useful.
And when you set up a completion, also learn how your favorite completion system lets you put in things that look like they should match something on the list, but you actually want just the partial part or just the blank part. Like for example, in some systems you press meta return or like meta p to send what you already have there instead of selecting one of the completion options. And this is helpful because sometimes you'll want to name a file something that is a substring of another file, and you want to be able to say, yeah, that is actually what I meant, not the completion part.
Yeah, I think that's the only rough edge with most of those, where you have to be mindful of that, or, I have to select the prompt, or I have to type a special key for this edge case.
Yeah. But once you get that sorted out and you've drilled it into your fingers, it's very, very helpful to have completion sorted out. Okay. Emacs also comes with extensive manuals. You like to write very thorough manuals for your packages, which I also appreciate. But flipping through manuals for fun is something that we've discussed in previous previous session Prot Talk Emacs. This is such a great practice. You learn something new every day. I've got I was going through the Emacs manual in preparation for this conversation, and I was just highlighting things that I need to dig into.
It's very useful. And again, to point out completion, Control H capital R is how you can search for the manual of a package. Like, for example, I'm interested in org. Control H capital R, org. I find org from anywhere, right? Control H capital R, and then I will search for something else, right? E-list, for example, to go to the Emacs list reference manual. Again, very useful. And from inside the manuals, G to go to a chapter, also known as a node, I to go to a topic, an index, and M if you want, but G and I, just think of G and I, very, very useful.
Oh,
M is also useful to navigate the menu of the current node.
I use S also for search.
And there's for a search throughout, yes.
Yes. I have not been using Control HR. I have been using Control HI to look at the whole list of info manuals, and then using M or isearch like a newbie. So it's nice.
That works. The problem with that is that if you have already gone into a manual, Control HI will take you back to that manual.
Yes, I had to
so
quit
you have
it
to go
and then
out.
start again.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I'm learning new things.
Nice.
Okay, you mentioned you are not a fan of you don't use the menus, and I know a lot of
but
people.
I appreciate them.
Yeah.
And in in a couple of my packages, I have menu bar entry.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people turn the menu bar off in their, okay, this is how you configure Emacs sort of tutorials. But if you're new to Emacs, and actually even if you're an intermediate user, I strongly recommend sacrificing that tiny sliver of vertical space for the menu bar, because it's a great way to discover commands that are related to your particular major mode or other things. And it's just fun to go through it and see what's been deemed worthy of including in one of those menus. If you there are some efforts now to get the right click mouse menus to also have lots of interesting options, but definitely the menu bar at the top, which can also be accessed if you use F10 if you don't want to use the mouse. And the menu bars even work on terminal, which is nice. So yes, menu bar at the top has a lot of useful suggestions for discovering things.
Yes, excellent. And the part you mentioned about key navigation, that's also good. You may be okay, I don't want to use the mouse. There you have it. You don't have to.
And speaking of key navigation, if you press Control HK, which is describe key, it will work on menu items as well. So if you're finding yourself always going to the menu to do this thing, sometimes the menu items are not named the same as their commands, but you can use Control HK to find out what that function is and what keyboard shortcuts it's bound to. So then you can call it with MetaX directly, or you can memorize the keyboard shortcuts. Okay, shall we move on to automation, for which Emacs has a ton of built-in things.
Too many.
Using abbreviations and things like that is actually something I picked up from reading your config, I think, because you use abbreviations a lot.
Yeah. Very nice. Very useful. Even for basic things, for example, I want to write, my fancy French expressions oh, this is so deja vu, and I want to have the accents correct. I just write deja vu with English, and then I have the French equivalent with all the fancy accents. So stuff like that you can do, something you keep misspelling the whole time, you actually do it right. Something that is with an annoying spelling, annoying capitalization, like LaTeX. Nobody knows how that is written. You just write it LaTeX or lowercase and then expand to whatever it should expand. This sort of thing is very useful. And of course, you can just have some short text which expands into very long text.
And we should also point out, if you type something that is normally an abbreviation like LaTeX, but in this case you actually want to write the word latex or latex, then how do you do the abbreviation without it being expanded into whatever that is?
Of course, you would rather avoid that situation. With your abbreviation, it wouldn't be like that. But otherwise, you will have to undo. When you do space and it expands, you undo So that is a little bit annoying for sure. But I would say just make sure to have abbreviations that are not ordinary words. Like they are a little bit contrived, so you don't get false positives. A good use case here, like what I have in my configuration, like you can have your abbreviations behind the key, behind the character, such as the semicolon. Then, of course, it's very unlikely that you will have semicolon later.
The other thing that you could potentially do is use Control Q to quote the next character literally. So here, for example, I have OT expand to the current time, but if I say OT Control Q space, this helps. And in general, this idea of a Control Q to quote the next character is also useful in other places where you might, for example, need to add a literal new line to a search or something like that. So
yeah, or a literal tab. It's quite.
You can just Control Q. Okay, and the other thing that I want to add to snippets, so to abbreviations here, is your abbreviations are not limited to just text. You can use them to run things, which means you can use them to run things that expand to text, or I think you might even get away with using them to run commands. So it's like pretty limitless.
And of course, it's how determined you are to write custom code for that.
Yeah. Or how resourceful you are in finding other people's custom code that you can copy and paste. Good motivation to learn Emacs Lisp. I do not remember if YaSnippet is built in. It feels like it's built in, but...
No, but okay. It's one of those that, basically everybody uses. YaSnippet or Temple.
All right. A couple of questions from chat. When highlighting parts of the manual, how are you doing this? In Bookmarks, Bookmark region, or using org-narrow, other ways? I've just been I was doing this at the playground the other day, so I just had it in my iPad and I had it in one of those graphical note-taking things and was highlighting with a pencil. But I've heard good things about org-narrow, which is a package. And you can also use just org capture if you're reading the manuals from within Emacs, which you can. If you org capture, you can even select sections of the manual and it will automatically save that in the capture template along with a link back to where you were looking. So this is great.
And since you mentioned org capture and we talked about bookmarks earlier, when you do org capture or org refile, it stores a bookmark. So you can go back to the last capture, the last refile.
Yeah, which is handy. Also, you can use org refile to navigate your org files. So in addition to using it to jump to the last thing that you filed because you were like, oh yeah, wait, I forgot, I want to add more to that note. You can also use it to jump to any of your projects, for example, or any of your notes, assuming you've set up your org refile targets appropriately. Okay. Rand has a question, does Emacs have a grammar checker like Harper's LSP? I know there are packages that people can use to work with Harper and other things. Do you know of any other built-in things?
Built-in, it's a fly spell, but that's not grammar, that's spelling.
Okay. All right.
So I cannot think of some. No, I don't think there is for grammar. So Harper or anything like that would plug into FlyMake.
Okay.
Via LSP, via Iglot in this case.
Okay. Greg has a question. What are your favorite completion plugins? I like using Vertigo.
Yeah, I think it's really Vertigo. Like I prefer it over the built-in options.
Yeah.
Over iComplete. Yeah. So it's Vertigo, and then with that, I would say at minimum orderless. So Vertigo and orderless at minimum. But then, of course, if you want a little bit more, which is very useful, Marginalia, Consult, Embark, and maybe I'm forgetting something. SafeHist, it's built in. But yeah, those for sure.
And H. Malman says dabbrev or dynamic abbreviations is underrated. You don't need to predefine them. You just type the start of a word or symbol and type / and it will search the buffer for something starting with what's left of the, what's on the left side of your point and then expand it. And I can't remember if it's dabbrev or hippie expand, but you can also set it up so that it can try words from other buffers or other things that you've got or, contacts or whatever. Anyway, so dynamic abbreviations, if you search for dabbrev, and if you look also for hippie expand, you will find lots of things that you can configure to fit your particular workflow, so you can expand abbreviations without having to define them.
Yeah. Super powerful, super useful. I use it more than tab completion, like with core. I use dabbrev more. It's very nice.
Yeah. Okay. So we mentioned keyboard macros very briefly, but this is another it's a very powerful chunk of things that people might not be used to if they're coming from an editor that is not Emacs. So keyboard macros. What's kind of like the thing that we can use to explain? How do we explain it to people who are new to this?
In its simplest form, you record what you typed and you can play it back in its simplest form. But the thing with Emacs is that you don't just record typing motions, typing actions. You also record all the Emacs motions. So you can have a keyboard macro that includes stuff such as move to another window or create a new split or whatever. Like you can do more advanced things like that. And this has very nice qualities to it, where it's like, oh, I just want to copy all these symbols and move them to my shell buffer, and then I will do something with them, pipe them to some program outside of Emacs. So it has a lot of nice applications like that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if people can get the hang of, okay, very carefully setting up their keyboard macro, think, okay, what's a series of steps that I can do so that I can do the change and then move my cursor to the start of where the next change should be. Often, like for example, I'll start the keyboard macro, I'll delete a word, I'll type in something new, or maybe I'll paste in a register, and then I'll use isearch to find the next point at which I need to do something. And if you define your keyboard macros like this, then you're giving yourself the ability to interactively confirm whether you're still on the right track and then make the change, because that way, it's not just like a search and replace and you're hoping it all works out. Although the recent search and replaces are great because they show you the changes. But for something that's more complex, especially if you're not used to regular expressions, keyboard macros can help you kind of interactively do it in small steps.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, search and replace will be more tricky if you have to go through many files and perform multiple edits in each file, because then the concept of regular expressions breaks down. You don't want to think in those terms, where it's like, okay, I have to make a change somewhere towards the top, and then somewhere in the middle, and then somewhere towards the end. So keyboard macros combined with dred, combined with going to the file, very nice. Just to say, another thing about keyboard macros is, let's say you have written your very nice keyboard macro, you're recording it, and somewhere towards the end, you make a small mistake. Keep going, and then Control-X, Control-K, Control-E to edit your macro. And it's a text buffer, you just remove what you don't want.
And you can save these keyboard macros as well, so you can use them in a future Emacs session, or even turn them into your first Emacs list function. You can give it a name and you can run it that way. And in the next 3 minutes before the kiddo runs out for lunch break, I also want to mention, since we talked about making changes in multiple files, that grep and occur are both editable. You can do your grep and you can search for things. And then you can say Control-X, Control-Q, which turns it from read-only to something you can change. Then you can do your search and replace in that, and then you can Control-X, Control-Q it again, and those changes can get put back into all those different files.
It's amazing. And on this note, specifically for grep, if you edit many files with the grep edit mode that is built into Emacs 31, it will not save them for you. So Control-X S instead of Control-X, Control-S allows you to save multiple buffers. And every time it gives you a prompt, and you can type D to see the diff. Like, okay, what exactly did I change? So if you have many unsaved files, D to see what you're about to save, so you never make any mistake.
Mm-hmm. And taking advantage of these diffing tools is great also. If you're new to Emacs or you don't have a programming background, if you find yourself making changes to lots of files, I strongly recommend learning more about version control systems like Git, and then using something like Magit or even the built-in VC. If you use VC, you can use it and you have set up something like a Git repository. You can use Control-X V equal sign to diff to see the changes between your file and the previous thing that you had saved, which makes sense, so that you can see, okay, these are the changes. And also it means that you can experiment with different changes. Like you can experiment with different ways of writing a paragraph or whatever, and you know that all of your previous versions are saved, and you don't have, really final version to the, you don't clutter your directory with a lot of copies of the same file.
But even if you don't have any of the version control system set up, a very simple thing is diff buffer with file.
Yes.
So you have a file you are working on, and now you make some edits. The buffer, so what is in memory, is different than what is on disk. So you can compare the difference between the two.
Okay, I'm going to try to wrap up here because the kid's going to run
Yes,
and say hi
yes.
very soon. Thank you so much for joining me. Of course, there's a lot more to talk about the Emacs built-ins, but I hope we've given a quick tour of some of the things that are definitely worth learning more about, and the situations for which they are absurdly useful. And thanks to everyone in chat also for coming and hanging out. I will post the show notes eventually, and get the transcript sorted out. Thanks.
You're welcome. Take care, and of course, good luck with everything.
All right.
Or no, wait, or didn't she show up here?
Oh.
She will.
When she shows up, she will. It's inevitable. But anyway, also if folks are interested, even if you've never blogged before, the Emacs Carnival theme for June 2026 is Underappreciated Emacs built-ins, which is why we had this conversation. Feel free to write about something and either send me a link, or you can even send me the post and I'll post it on my blog with your name on it and other things like that, so you can share your appreciation for these built-ins. All right. Okay, I hear movement, so I gotta go. All right.
Take care, Sacha. Take care, folks. Goodbye.
Okay.